In the 1990s, Mansfield High School in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, was known for its strong curriculum, athletic programs, and extracurricular activities. And out of the approximately 1,800 students that attended, one girl was arguably the most gifted overall. The school's vibrant and challenging environment had prepared her for the next chapter of her life. And believe me when I say, she was ready to shut and never revisit the previous chapter. But in 1994, the hallways of Mansfield that usually encompassed the laughter and chatter of the students would be substituted with utter shock when one of their most accomplished turned out to be their most cold-blooded as well. But there was an extremely cruel twist in this story that would turn her conscience against her. My name is Killian, and welcome to True Crime Stories. Stacy High was a teenager attending Mansfield in 1994. Her upbeat personality made her a well-liked figure amongst her classmates, so much so that she was voted most humorous in her senior class. But beneath her sunny exterior lay a history of struggles. Being from a broken home, she was raised by a single mother, which taught her to be sensitive to the emotional needs of others. So when Stacy met 16-year-old Dorothy Marie Robards, a new, rather mysterious student who had just transferred, she couldn't resist taking a closer look. Marie's unapproachable demeanor often intimidated those who crossed her path, which made it hard for them to get to know her. As a result, they began to distance themselves. But not Stacy, who claimed that she and Marie pretty much fell in love with each other right away. Every day, Marie strode into school immaculately dressed with perfectly styled hair and coordinated accessories. Despite her flawless appearance, Stacy sensed that Marie was trying her best to hide something. And having undergone therapy for her own trauma, Stacy was keenly attuned to the signs of emotional distress. Being the empathetic person that she was driven to help Marie fight her inner demons and heal from any traumatic experiences she may have endured. What Marie could not keep hidden was her academic excellence, submitting all her coursework on time and consistently earning A's, excelling in subjects such as chemistry, English, and French. She also displayed a multifaceted array of talents in art, dance, and the sport of volleyball. And to make things even more unfair, she was blessed with striking physical features, beautiful skin, and elegantly long legs. The boys simply could not take their eyes off her. But the students would learn that life did take something dear from her that weighed on her mind tremendously: her father's tragic death. Several rumors had spread amongst her peers that her father was still alive, but Marie never took the time to actually debunk this. Instead, she let their imaginations run wild. Except for Stacy, who knew that Marie's father had succumbed to a sudden cardiac arrest just a year prior, in 1993. This tragedy prompted Marie to go and live with her grandparents, and that was around the time she transferred to Mansfield High. As the girls became fast friends, with a bond of being fatherless, they quickly grew inseparable. Stacy's father was absent for the majority of her life. He didn't even bother trying to stay in the same area code, let alone the same state, as he moved away to Mississippi. As you could imagine, when a parent chooses distance, it could leave the child feeling unwanted, and resentment usually follows shortly. One weekend, Stacy decided to introduce Marie to one of the country western bars that dotted the north side of Fort Worth. Using fake IDs, they slipped into the bars with Marie dressed in tight jeans that accentuated her already stunning figure. The patrons at the bar were so taken by Marie's appearance with her gorgeous dark eyes and dark brown hair that they referred to her as the Cowboy Barbie doll. The two girls even became writing partners on the yearbook staff. Stacy was a thorough researcher, always able to get to the heart of the story. Marie, on the other hand, had a talent for writing and enjoyed putting ideas on paper. But through all this, Stacy still sensed that impenetrable shell that Marie put up. Stacy remained persistent in her efforts to coax her out of it, but Marie was unwilling to talk about her past, especially that of her father. Even in the company of her grandparents at home, she would leave the room if he was even brought up. She learned that Marie would not even visit his grave. The way we handle grief is a subjective and deeply personal experience. There's no clear-cut right or wrong reaction to the death of a loved one. But Stacy could sense that something else was bothering her, and there seemed to be nothing she could do or say that would open that chapter of her life. Until halfway through their senior year, Stacy and Marie sat down for a study session. The girls were tasked with reading Shakespeare's Hamlet for their English class, so they brought out their notes and began to study the soliloquy of Claudius, Act 3. Claudius, the play's antagonist, expresses deep guilt and remorse for his actions. Earlier in the play, it is revealed that Claudius has murdered his brother, Hamlet's father, in order to ascend the throne and marry Hamlet's mother. Claudius is shackled by his own guilt after poisoning his brother and laments that he is unable to truly repent. And it just so happened to be Stacy's favorite part of the play, and her eyes lit up as she recited it with dramatic flair, her Texas drawl adding a touch of Southern charm. And I will not be doing a Texas accent with Southern charm, because I can't. My fault is past, but oh, what form of prayer can serve my turn? Forgive my foul murder? That cannot be, since I am still possessed of those effects for which I did the murder. When Stacy looked up, she noticed Marie's hands quivering on the table. As hot tears rolled down her cheek, the color drained in unison, leaving behind a pale face that was on the brink of falling apart. Marie then asked Stacy a question that caught her completely off guard. Do you think people can go through life without a conscience? The question lingered in the air. There was something in Marie's eyes that Stacy had never seen before. Well, she answered, how about the kind of person who can look somebody in the eye and kill him in cold blood? And that seemed to do it. Marie stood up, back up against the wall, dropped to the floor and sobbed uncontrollably, hugging her knees tightly to her chest. Stacy stood up as well, clearly in shock and at a loss for words, not sure what could have caused such a visceral reaction. Marie, what's the matter? Guess, she replied, her voice breaking. Stacy's thoughts raced, thinking of all the possible scenarios that could elicit such a response. But then, as if sudden realization had dawned on her, she blurted out, "Oh my God, are you pregnant?" The answer was no. Did she perhaps total her grandparents' car? A big fat no. "My father," said Marie, her body trembling. Stacy braced herself for what she was about to hear, but nothing could have prepared her for it. The words that fell from Marie's lips would descend like a dark cloud over their once carefree friendship, and things were going to be different, a lot different. To better understand this story, let's meet Marie's father. Stephen Robards was a prominent and attractive figure in Fort Worth, Texas during the 1970s. He towered over most people at a height of 6'4". His dark, curly hair framed his chiseled features, and his lean, sinewy body was a testament to his athleticism. During high school, Stephen was known for his good looks and charming personality. He was well liked by his peers and had a reputation as the popular kid. Beth Lomer was a bright-eyed, innocent Catholic girl who saw the world through a pure, untainted lens. And when she met Stephen, she felt as though the heavens had sent him just for her. As their eyes locked, they knew that without a doubt that they were destined to be together. So in 1974, they exchanged vows, tied the knot, ready to take the world on as a couple. 3 years later, in 1977, they would have Marie to make it a happy trio. But after their teenage romance and subsequent marriage, Stephen's behavior took a dark turn, and Beth began to realize that her Prince Charming wasn't as flawless as she thought he was. Reality began to chip away at their fragile relationship. Stephen became erratic and unpredictable, leaving Beth feeling confused and uncertain about their future together. He was allegedly bipolar, fought depression, and would often spiral into fits of jealousy and rage. He could barely hold down a job, and his outlook on life became increasingly dark and pessimistic. Not much is known about Marie during this time, but it was clear to everyone that she would not leave her mother's side. They shared a bond that most mothers and daughters could only dream of having, and they behaved more like siblings than a parent and child. After a 4-year stint in the Navy, where Stephen served at bases in Florida and San Diego, he and his family moved around a bit before returning back to Fort Worth. But the marriage was already over. In 1981, after divorcing Stephen and gaining custody of 4-year-old Marie, Beth met a new man named Frank Burroughs, a former Navy petty officer whom she had met while Stephen was serving in Florida. They were nothing more than just friends in the beginning, but as time passed, their relationship blossomed into something else. Frank, too, was a recently divorced father with a young son. He took on the role of protective father figure and became a pillar for Beth and Marie, and their new family could now begin a new chapter in Granbury, Texas. And as for Stephen and Marie's relationship, they only got to see each other once or twice a month. Unfortunately for Beth, as the years went by, familiar cracks emerged once again, but in different places. Marie, for one, never had a good relationship with Frank, which only worsened after she walked in on him with another woman. She ran straight to her mom and was quick to rat him out, but despite this, her mom decided to stay with him. Beth loved Frank to pieces and attributed his infidelity to her demanding work schedule at the hospital. But Marie was having none of it. This completely shattered her trust in him, and she began to despise his every move. She refused to comply with his requests, like cleaning her room when asked. She would talk back and couldn't bear to stay in his presence or in the house for much longer. She was upset with her mom and felt deeply betrayed. How dare she choose Frank over her own daughter? Beth, still holding on to hope, believed that Frank would eventually change, despite his actions. But a week or so later, Marie ran away to live with her real father, Stephen, who couldn't be happier to have her. Stephen had been a divorcee for the past 13 years and worked as a postman for the U.S. Postal Service. He took pride in his work and enjoyed being outdoors. He had also been taking medication for his depression and volatile behavior, and was doing so much better by the time Marie arrived. Months later, on a Wednesday evening in February of 1993, 16-year-old Marie, Stephen, and his new girlfriend Sandra decided to enjoy some Mexican takeout for dinner. When the food arrived, Marie took the food and made her way into the kitchen. She then unfolded a paper towel, and carefully, she took a spoonful of powder and sprinkled it onto Stephen's refried beans, mixing it thoroughly to make sure to mask the taste of poison. She then returned to her father and served him the tainted dish. Stephen thanked his daughter and began eating the food, but after a couple of bites, he commented on how salty it was, but continued to eat it regardless. He then left to attend an evening church service at the Richard Hills Church of Christ, but returned home less than an hour later, complaining of stomach cramps and nausea. His condition rapidly deteriorated like quicksand, and he collapsed right there in the living room and began foaming at the mouth. Panicked, Sandra rushed to get help from the neighbors next door, and when they arrived, Stephen told them that he could feel his arms and legs stiffening up. His body continued to convulse violently, and soon he slipped into a coma-like state. Marie sat in silence and watched as her father took his final breaths. The same man who welcomed her with open arms and did everything to make her feel at home. When the paramedics finally arrived, it was already too late. Stephen's throat had closed up, and despite their best efforts to save his life, he was already gone as they raced to the hospital. The neighbor would later recall that when paramedics took Stephen's body away, Marie stood in the doorway, seemingly shocked, but she didn't utter a single word to the paramedics. Later that night, when Beth and Frank arrived at the hospital, she was taken back with them to Granbury, just as she planned. In the days and weeks that followed, Marie kept her dark secret buried deep inside, but eventually, the burden was too much to bear, and it all came crashing down that night. She confided in Stacy, who encouraged her to turn herself in, but Marie couldn't do it, or wouldn't do it, and the heavy burden was transferred solely onto the conscience of Stacy. And in the months to come, Stacy's guilt manifested into recurring nightmares of Stephen calling out to her from his grave. There was even one where Marie was chasing her relentlessly, and for the next 8 months, her grades began to suffer as she struggled to concentrate in school, and she turned to heavy drinking at parties to numb those haunting words. Stacy knew that without concrete evidence, it would be Marie's word against hers. But in the end, Stacy faced a tough decision: let the secret eat her up inside for the rest of her life, or sending her best friend to prison by bringing the killer to justice. She finally chose to confide in her mother. At first, she innocently dismissed her claims, but ended up calling the poison center to inquire about the deadly chemical Marie had used, whether it was lethal enough to cause death, say, by closing up your throat or causing cardiac arrest. The person on the other end confirmed that it certainly could. With the strain of such a secret, Stacy and Marie would eventually go their separate ways. Marie received $60,000 from her father's life insurance, which she used to enroll at the University of Texas in Austin to study pre-med to become a pathologist. An ironic, if not guilt-driven path. Stacy, on the other hand, enrolled in Sam Houston State University 3 hours away. Eventually, the nightmares and the crippling guilt got the better of Stacy High, so she spoke with a counselor and ultimately the police. After her confession, investigators hoped that samples of Stephen's body were still available for re-examination, and they were in luck, as the medical examiners were just days away from destroying the tissue samples, which they usually do if they don't suspect foul play. While they waited for the results, detectives searched the school's chemistry lab where Marie had obtained the poison. It was there that they discovered a safety manual with the page describing the exact chemical torn out. During Marie's freshman year at the university, she found out that her father's case had been reopened. The dread that must have flushed over her must have been chilling. Detectives were now asking the simple question that should have been asked from the start. How could a 38-year-old seemingly healthy man die of a heart attack so suddenly? He didn't. But they couldn't prove it back then regardless because money. The initial autopsy failed to detect the rare poison because in order for them to do that, they required a costly machine, a mass spectrometer gas chromatograph, around $150,000, which they didn't have in the budget, though they did know that his heart was enlarged, 25% too heavy for a man his age. The sample they were waiting on was sent to an independent forensic laboratory in Pennsylvania, and it took 18 months for the results to finally come out. During this time, Stacy began to question whether she made the right decision or a terrible mistake. Surely Marie must have been too traumatized by her father's death to know what she was saying, right? She could have made the whole thing up. But when the results came back, the chemical Marie had stolen from her class was found in Stephen's body and was an astonishing 28 times the fatal dose. Given that Marie had a vast knowledge of chemistry, she knew what poison wouldn't be detected in an autopsy and what chemical would mimic signs of a heart attack. But let me tell you what is not commonly seen in a natural death, and that is foaming at the mouth. It's typically a sign of a drug overdose, poisoning, or seizures. On October of 1995, Fort Worth police wasted no time in driving to the University of Texas to arrest Marie Robards for the murder of her father. She didn't argue, protest, or cry when confronted by the police. Instead, she went with them quietly without any need for force. And when Marie walked into the interrogation room, they hardly had to say a few words before Marie spilled the beans about everything. She even typed a written confession, one excerpt reading, "While he was gone, I put the chemical I got from my chemistry lab in his beans. It was about an average-sized spoon." Marie's confession revealed her sheer desperation. It was summed up by a simple statement: "I just wanted to be with my mom, and I would have done anything to be with her." She later signed it, handed it over, which was later used as evidence, and she was charged with murder. At the trial, the courtroom was tense with anticipation as Marie Robards entered. Her demeanor was calm and collected, but her eyes betrayed her as they glistened with tears. Her once long and flowing hair was now cut in a severe, almost nun-like bob. She wore a plain sleeveless blouse with a flower pattern and loose-fitting pants that seemed much too big for her. Not so perfectly dressed anymore, now is she? And to everyone's shock, Marie pleaded not guilty, even though she just confessed to the police, claiming that she was only intending to make her father sick, not kill him. She even tried to sully her father's good name, claiming that he abused her, when in the interrogation room, she admitted that he never did anything he wasn't supposed to. Sandra was quick to shut her down, saying that he was nothing but a loving and caring father. However, the damning piece of evidence was when Stacy testified against her, saying that Marie knew the poison was dangerous and just a fraction of that spoonful would have been enough to kill him. Stacy had done the right thing. She knew it and had no qualms or regrets about testifying against Marie. A series of letters written by Marie to her mother were revealed. She complained about almost everything, that the apartment they were living in was too small, to having only a few kitchen utensils, that Dad lacked the basic household skills like cleaning, his meals were not to her liking, and she had to sleep on a rollaway bed in the dining room. But she didn't factor in that Stephen would take her out to the movies and to restaurants, hoping to get closer to his daughter. His heart was in the right place. He wanted to make things better just for her. All she had to do was wait. This picture encapsulates one of the more wholesome moments they had together. From the outside, father and daughter seemed happy. Stephen was thrilled to have her back in his life and strived to be a better father. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, if Marie missed her mother so much, why didn't she just go home? Well, you see, if Marie hadn't run away in the first place, none of this would have ever happened, because her stepfather Frank made it crystal clear to Marie and even his own son that if they ever went to visit their other parent, they could forget about ever coming back. And he was true to his word because he had already banished his own son. That didn't stop Marie from begging her mother to take her back, but Frank stood firm on his decision. There were lots of screaming, crying, and raised voices. Beth found herself torn between the loyalty to her husband and the love for her daughter. Ultimately, she sided with Frank. And here's the cruel twist that I mentioned earlier. So after Stephen Robards' funeral service, Marie's mother took her aside and told her that they'd be moving to Florida. And then she dropped a bombshell that she was leaving Frank, and it was just going to be her and Marie once again. Marie's eyes widened. It looked like she couldn't breathe, but not for the reasons her mother would expect. Beth continued to explain that she had found a job in Florida and was going to take Marie back from her dad. Her mother had planned this move and didn't tell her until her father's funeral, leaving Marie to suffer in silence, to plot in silence, and carry out the unthinkable. She murdered her father for absolutely nothing. Beth told reporters, "If I had only told Marie 1 week earlier, none of this would have ever happened. But lady, your daughter would have still been capable of murder if she wanted something bad enough." They dubbed Dorothy Marie Robards as the Lizzie Borden of Texas. She duped the medical examiners, duped forensic science, and everybody around her. If she hadn't confessed to Stacy, and if Stacy had never come forward, she surely would have gotten away with it. On May 9th of 1995, the jury found her guilty in less than an hour. She was sentenced to 27 years in prison and received a hefty fine of $10,000, which she paid off with her father's life insurance money. Marie, despite being only 16, was tried as an adult and sent to the women's unit in East Texas, where she would remain for several years. In 2003, Marie was granted parole, and just a year later, she got married and started a new life under a new name. Some have pointed a finger at Stacy's mom for not acting immediately when her daughter confided in her. Some blame the school for making the chemicals so accessible. Some have put the blame on Beth, saying that none of this would have happened if she had more compassion for her only child. What do you think? In my opinion, none of this would have happened if Marie wasn't a spoiled little bitch that had a little thing called patience. My name is Killian. I hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to subscribe for more just like it. Much love to my Patreons. Please consider becoming one, as true crime videos are demonetized. Now go protect the ones you love, and love the ones that protect you.